Welcome to Percussion Perspectives, a podcast by Henrik Knapper Larsen and Håkon Steine. Each episode of Percussion Perspectives features one or more musical artists in conversation about musical education, practice, and aesthetic and sociological perspectives.
Claire Edwards is an Australian percussion soloist, chamber musician, artistic director and educator who has received the Australian Performing Rights Association's Art Music Award for Excellence by an Individual 3 times. Claire leaps between her role as artistic director of the Ensemble Offspring and concerto performances with all of the Australian and New Zealand orchestras, plus many European orchestras. She has released 9 solo albums and premiered hundreds of new works by living composers, and she is a teacher at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. In this episode, Claire talks about her transition from being a young pianist to being a percussionist and how she could draw on her efficiency and work ethic to acquire the craft of percussion in the shortest possible time. She speaks about how to cope with input from many different teachers, about artistic leadership, and how she works for gender equity in music.
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 4. 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4. 1, 4, 2, 4, 3. 3, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 1, 4, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, 4, 6, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, 6. When I was 7, I was given the award for trying the hardest at ballet class. After which time, I decided to focus more on my piano practice.
So Claire, welcome to the Percussion Perspectives podcast. We're happy to have you here and to hear about your insights. Can you tell us a little bit how it all started for you, your way into music and into percussion specifically, and how that developed to where you are now?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Håkon. I don't know whether my story is similar to other percussionists, but I started on piano. So I think we either start on piano or drums, it tends to be. And so I started on piano when I was 5 and kind of fell into percussion because I wanted to play with other people. And I always kept learning piano, but I played in wind bands on percussion, just sort of taught myself xylophone. And I found it super fun, and it was easy, of course, as a pianist, you go from 2 lines to 1 line and it's like, oh, this is easy, I can do this. So I always really enjoyed it. And I just loved the social aspect of playing in wind bands. I loved hanging out with people and the social aspect of music, really. So I think that in a way is what made me, in the end, go towards percussion rather than piano. I don't think at the time I realized that the repertoire and the tradition of piano would have driven me insane as a professional. So I think it was a lucky choice in a way. But I basically went to the Sydney Conservatorium not really having had any lessons. I couldn't play snare drum rolls. I couldn't play full mallets. I couldn't really do anything. I don't know how I got in. I mean, I was a good musician. I'd done my A-Mas on piano, which is one of our highest levels here in Australia. So I definitely had a good background in Bach and all the classics, and I loved Bartok and I loved things that were more rhythmic. And I think my rhythm was always quite good, but I had a long road ahead of me at the Conservatorium because I had to practice my little butt off to get as good as kind of the level that everyone else was already on.
What was your strategy then? Can you say something about how you structured your time?
It's always been a skill of mine, I think, and I feel lucky that I have that skill. I'm a very I'm a Virgo, so I'm very organized. I like lists and I like to achieve things. So I was always also very academic at school, and I like to get good marks, and I was always very organized with my piano practice. And, you know, with piano, you've got to practice like 3 hours a day to do that really difficult repertoire. So I think that really helped me when I got to the con, because I knew I had to practice a lot, and there's a lot of different things to balance. Of course, you're going into university for the first time, and it's also quite social. But I always prioritize practice, because I knew that if I didn't, there was a possibility that I would be left behind, and I'm a high achiever, and I wanted to achieve the best result I could.
This is maybe jumping ahead in the conversation, but have you somehow managed to make your weaknesses become your strengths, or the stuff you love more, or are your strengths back then still your strengths today?
If I'm completely honest, I think my strengths back then are still my strengths today. In a way, I moved away from my strengths, which was reading notes and playing mallet percussion. So when I was in uni and when I went to Holland to study, I did a lot of multi-pieces and I did a lot of things outside of my comfort zone. But what I come back to now as a professional is in a way the ease of playing mallet percussion pieces, because they're both easy for me to play because I can read them very easily and I can get around the instruments very easily. But I also just this is such I don't think anyone else would probably say this who you talk to, but I just can't be bothered with big setups. Like I just don't want another setup in my life. I sort of did that, and that's it for me. And I've got kids and my life's really complicated, and every time I see something more than a tom-tom and a cymbal mixed with a mallet instrument, I'm like, no, get the piece away from me.
It sounds like the classic midlife crisis.
I'm just being completely honest. I'm a bit embarrassed about it and I'm going red.
That resonates with me as well. This kind of the practical side of being a musician just takes such a toll on your life.
Especially percussion. Like there was even a period, you know, that period, you might still be in it, where before you have kids, where you agree to playing all these wacky pieces where you need to like spend hours driving around trying to find the particular length of like boat metal that's going to be the perfect guiro. Like I played this piece by Felipe Waller, and I couldn't, like, the time that it took to find all the freaking bits versus the actual, like, I want my satisfaction to come from the music. Like, I don't actually get satisfaction from finding the bits anymore. So I just want to like get down to it and play the music. And probably I should have been a violinist, I think.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, marimba isn't that easy to put in a pocket either. But,
No, it's
no, I totally agree with that. In some sense, I still have that urge in me to find the perfect piece of metal and the perfect mallet and whatever. I'm a sound nerd still after 2 kids and no time, basically.
Of course, I prioritize sound. Like, you can't not. I mean, that's why we do what we do. But I've always been that person who doesn't care about like which mallets you use or what the snare drum head is, or like, I'm not that kind of orchestral nerd who like cares about the brands and stuff. It's like, if it sounds good, I'm happy, and that's what I'm looking for. But it's kind of liberating to get older and be able to admit that.
Totally. Okay, that was a bit of a sidetrack maybe, but let's go back to can you tell us a little about your years as a student? You lived for a while in the Netherlands, and I think also London.
I lived in the Netherlands for 7 years, but I just spent a lot of time in London. So I never actually lived in London.
The first time we met was on a pub in London, I think, East London, after a concert at this, in the warehouse, I think.
The warehouse, yeah. I was talking to someone about that the other day, and those were such awesome concerts. God, that was a long time ago. I did a lot of gigs in the UK, and it was such a rich time, like in terms of opportunities, and I feel like I wouldn't have my time again. Like, and it's a long time ago now. It was from 1999 to 2006, so it's not exactly yesterday, but they were, in a way, the formative years. Like, I think those were the years that shaped me as both a person and a musician. You know, I had my freedom. It was risky. It was hard. It was the first time I'd lived out of home. I had teachers who pushed me very far, including Peter Prommel, Jan Pustjens, Richard Janssen in Rotterdam. And I did competitions, which I was successful in. So I had great opportunities as well. And I met lots of people, and I got to work with percussion group The Hague a lot and lots of ensembles around Europe. So it was a time of, just so many opportunities. And I developed a lot, I would say, as a musician during that time. Mostly, I would say, in relation to my stage presence, like not stage presence, but like how am I going to communicate the music further than just my interpretive understanding of the music? So how can I use being a percussionist to the actual kind of limits of what we can do physically? And I'm always been the person who hates the like girl with the long hair who like flashes it around, or like does like those people who do those big arm movements. Oh my God, that's so annoying. It's not helping the music. It's just being like a circus act. So the thing that I learned in Holland was how to make my movements and my physicality affect both the sound and how the audience perceived the music. And I feel like that was a really, really important development in in becoming a professional musician who understood like what I wanted to do with music, you know.
That's super interesting. Was there a certain kind of methodology you applied to achieve that? When you say how the audience receives the music, that's a bit of a psychological or, you know, perceptive gamble maybe, or how can you calculate those things, or how can you even work around that?
What I find a lot with my students, but all musicians actually, in the most part, is that I feel like they're not really in touch with how their physical energy affects the perception of music from an audience's perspective. So I'm only really talking about live situations where they can see you play, right? And again, I would never suggest someone makes a movement just because it looks good. But what my teachers did, which was really interesting, and I've never really talked about this before, except in lessons that I teach, I guess, but they said, you know, we will video you, and that was really awkward because it was before the time of phones and you had to do it on the cameras and everything. It was such a hassle. And I hated watching myself. And Richard was always like, just push yourself like 3 times past the place that it feels comfortable in terms of the movements that you're making, and like going close to the marimba, just say if you're playing soft or whatever the movement is, just do it much more extreme than you feel comfortable. Watch it and you'll see that it's probably not that extreme, and then you can draw it back to the place that you feel comfortable. And I've really worked a lot with that, I think, through my career, like, because I was always quite an expressive performer, and I won this thing in Australia called Young Performers just before I went to Europe. So that was like a soloist competition kind of thing. So I knew how to perform, but that was just my natural way of knowing how to perform. So being able to analyze it and really be in control of how the interpretation that you're making of the music is also embodied, I find really interesting.
Did you work with people beyond music for that, like choreographers or dancers or other?
I did a bit, and directors. I've always been really interested in dance and collaborating with dancers as well. I'm not a dancer at all, and but I did do this really interesting collaboration a few years ago in Australia called Recital with a dancer, and I created the music with another composer together. And then it was just me and a dancer on stage. And so I had to do quite a lot of physical things with him. We did a lot of like running and things together. And, you know, I would say in retrospect, I definitely was not in my comfort zone, although a lot of people enjoyed it and said that it was great. And you can watch the video of it online. But I think I do those things more to sort of push myself out of my comfort zone on purpose. Like, I'm not to say I would ever really feel comfortable pretending to be a dancer. I'm definitely not. But I like what it teaches me as a musician in terms of not being comfortable, because that's the interesting thing about getting older. You can get comfortable because you know yourself, you know what you're good at, you know what you like. And so it's that constant thing of pushing past that, it's important.
Can you say something about how you managed to maneuver all the different inputs from your teachers in Holland at the time, and how you kind of keep your own authenticity throughout that process when you get all this information, all this feedback? I
think there's a period where you have no idea what your voice is. Like you're just trying to work it out, and you're so, especially as a postgraduate student, you think I should feel stronger in my sense of what it is that I want to be, and you just don't at all, because you've got like Richard Janssens in Rotterdam saying like, go 300%, and like just being really full on about everything, and just saying like I did the Trump percussion competition, and he was like, okay, you're doing Rog Ashanti by James Wood, and it's a massive setup, and I don't know how you're going to set it up in time, so let's put it on pallets, and we can use the forklift to take it out onto the stage, and like just all these full-on harebrained ideas. And I was always just like, that's never going to work, Richard. Oh my God. So I had to set that up, in the moment. That was really freaking stressful. And then Hans Leinders, who's a conductor now, and he was much more laid back, but really never said anything. So the Dutch thing of like of having to prove yourself before he ever said a compliment, that felt like it took forever. And that was, again, I felt like it was probably good for me in the long term, but it was hard work at the time. And eventually he came around to me, so that was kind of good. But then in Amsterdam, I had Peter Prommel, who's kind of like Richard, who's just really full-on teacher, who just has 1,000,001 ideas and is quite forceful about what he thinks you should do. And then Jan Pustjens, on the other hand, who I was too scared to have snare drum lessons with, because I was worried I wasn't good enough, and I was worried that he was going to judge me so badly, and I didn't, and I wasn't a very good snare drum player at that point. And he's passed away now, but I am so thankful that I put my ego aside, and I just went, it doesn't matter if he bashes you up mentally, like this is going to be good for you. And I did it, and I'm so glad, because like I still don't love playing snare drum. I'm not an orchestral snare drum player, but the fact that I have that technique means I can play rebonds really well, and I can play all the multi-pieces really well. And I didn't have that before he was my teacher. So I think something like the situation with Jan was easy in the end, because like he taught me the things I needed to know, and I did the work, and I got the technique, and that's great. Someone like Peter is more complex, because it's more an emotional teacher-student relationship, because he's kind of a full-on person. And so that for me, sometimes you can't work out who you are really as a musician and a person until you've left them, like gone out of the womb. And then you have the freedom to go, well, I know that my teacher always said I should use 6 different pairs of marimba mallets in this piece, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to use one, and sometimes go to the tips if that's what I want to do, and feeling like you can make those decisions for yourself because you're not being judged anymore. And it's quite liberating, I think. Going back to Australia I think it was harder than I thought it would be, because I'd worked really hard during the time I was overseas to come back and because I won that competition, I was doing concertos with the orchestras and stuff. So that was great, because it did mean, and I still had contact with Ensemble Offspring with my group, and I played with them when I came back. But the thing is, you haven't actually been in the scene for a long time, and also not really as a professional ever. So that was really confronting, kind of that thing that I think a lot of students have of, will I ever get work? Like, what if the phone doesn't ring? And that just used to freak me out so bad, because I knew I didn't want to just fall into teaching and fill up my time with only teaching, which does happen a lot in Australia. And so I did some crazy things, like we just had the football final here on yesterday, and there's this group called the Rabbitohs that Russell Crowe was managing. So he's a famous Australian actor. And one of my friends convinced me to join the Rabbitohs drum corps, where we played at the football matches. So because, you know, this would be work, and it was actually quite well paid, but I hated it so much. And every time I was at the football, because I don't like football, I was like, what am I doing here? And then luckily I got pregnant, and so I couldn't wear like the drum on my belly anymore. And I was like, see ya, I'm going now. I never want to do this again. So it was definitely hard for quite a few years. And the way I dealt with it, which is kind of how I guess dealt with my whole life, is by helping to organize Ensemble Offspring and becoming more of an organizer with Damien, the then artistic director, and sort of becoming an artistic director with him, which meant that I could control schedules, I could control repertoire. And yes, I'm probably a control freak, but I didn't want to be waiting for the phone to ring. Like I didn't want to be that kind of orchestral musician that I'm not really at all. Just waiting to see if I was popular or not. I wanted to like organize the stuff myself. So for me, this road works the best by far, because also when I have kids, I'm not like linked to some other schedule that I have to work around. Like I make it the thing that kind of suits me the best, and yeah, it just works.
You say you are a very organized person, and that kind of thing is easy for you. That also resonates with me, by the way. It's kind of a bit, you know, impatient, very, very, I think of myself as efficient, but sometimes to the limit where it isn't necessarily healthy. What you have to learn, or what about that sort of strength is a weakness when building an ensemble and when operating within the group, all this, you know, social psychology that goes on. What other qualities do you have to develop in order to function not only as an artistic director, but as a co-musician, as a colleague, as a collaborator within Offspring?
I think I'm definitely impatient by nature, very, and COVID's been quite good for me to that enforced kind of like patience. But I think also as you get older, and again being a parent, I think helps a bit as well. Patience with other people is super important. Like, you can't cut other people off. You can't walk all over them all the time. Like, they have to have a voice. They have to have a say. They have to feel, you know, like it's an equal kind of footing. And so while I do make the decisions in the most part of the repertoire that we play and stuff, and I lead rehearsals, because I think you can waste a lot of time if you don't have someone kind of pushing things forward. I'm very aware of making sure people are heard. And you know, for us, it's just been this very slow process of creating this combination of personalities that just works. And once you find that, it's very easy to keep going with those people because everyone's happy. You know, like there's a lot of contentment there. I think it was harder in the early days when there were these kind of people sticking out who made it really hard work sometimes, and then I didn't enjoy it, and then I felt really frustrated, like how do we push through this? So I think there's been many, you know, the ensemble's been going for 25 years, so 7 of those years without me, but there's been a lot of different phases, and I feel like, you know, while it's hard getting old, I mean, I just turned 46, so I'm not that old, but I'm older. The good thing that comes with it is a kind of internal, like a quiet confidence, I guess. You know, I talk a lot, but I definitely don't feel like I have to talk all the time, and this sort of respect that you have for your colleagues and they have for you. I think that's really important.
Within your ensemble, did you have, when you say someone's like not really belonging, do you just say hard luck, mate, and see you later, or you swap that member, or do you kind of bring the person in and include it somehow?
Eventually, we've had to do that a few times. You try hard, and sometimes they're, you know, mental issues that really, you know, people are complex characters, you know, especially artists, and I think we tend to take things on ourselves, like what did I do to offend that person, and actually the better question is, what sort of place is that person in at the moment? You know, is it a good place? Probably not. And if they're acting that way, it's probably not just you who's doing it to them, you know. And so I think being more self-aware in that way, it's been really hard for me because I take things very personally, and I don't want to offend people, but I'm also very direct. So in realizing that if you're going to be direct and if you're going to say what you think, then sometimes you are going to rub people up the wrong way and you are going to offend people. And that's part and parcel of being a leader. You know, like you can't be a strong leader and make everyone happy. And I think that's just an important realization that if that's your calling, you have to be strong, and you can't think that everyone's going to like you, because that doesn't happen all the time.
From what I gather, you're less and less interested of just being of just comforting everyone. So the older you get, you want the processes maybe to be a bit smoother and not have a lot of conflict in a process, because you want to focus on the result, and the organization part has to be professional, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the older you get, the less time you have in your life, the time that's ticking away till you die, but also like the hours in a day.
Very cheerful perspective.
But like I said, my priority is when I'm in a rehearsal, if that ever happens again, hopefully it will soon, or if I'm practicing, I want to be doing that like 100%. Like I don't want to be thinking about other things. I don't want to be dealing with other things. I want to be like enjoying the act of making music. And I think there are so many other things in life that are constantly trying to pull you away from that. And to sort of be able to cherish both that, the rehearsal side of it, but also performing. And, you know, I think COVID's shown us all. I was thinking before COVID, maybe I should give up performing, just to be honest, because I spend so much time doing administration and I'm good at it. I sort of like it. And I thought, you know, maybe my life would be simpler if I just focused more on that and I didn't really play so much anymore. But oh my God, I missed it so much. And that for sure made me realize I'm good at it. I have a calling. I think I'm good at communicating like verbally on stage, but also through music. And I feel like my big calling in life is to alter the way people perceive new music and not come at it in a kind of judgmental way of thinking, well, I don't understand this, so therefore I'm not going to like it. And I sort of feel like until I die, I will not give up on that sort of. And I have to do that as a performer. Like if I don't use my skills as a performer, then it's kind of a wasted opportunity, I think.
There's something about all these hours we put in that is so ingrained in every fiber of your body. Like for me at this point, like almost therapeutical to just practice alone in a room, because it reminds you of all that work you put in, and it's a place of happiness in a sense.
Yeah, well, we didn't actually talk about that before, but the thing, when I was in Holland, I practiced like 7 hours a day, like a stupid amount. Like you can't possibly actually focus for 7 hours. And I remember my teacher saying, Claire, you've got to get better at like score studying, like just practicing with a score. And I remember the sort of the turning point of, I could never do it as a student, by the way, because I always had the instruments there. And the only time when I learned how to do just score studying and practicing in my head was when I became a professional and I was on the road and I just didn't have access to instruments. So I had to do it. And now, funnily enough, I prefer sitting down with scores because I feel like I practiced so much in my life that I can visualize everything. Like I can work out every sticking, just do it. And I find that's my happy place, just sitting with scores and not even playing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also my point was a bit of this kind of just taking the time to be inefficient and unproductive and just enjoying that time with the score or with the instrument, whatever it is. It had nothing to do with business or with emailing or with being efficient or being clever.
I feel very passionately about gender equity at the moment, and I think probably forever. I think I feel embarrassed that it's only just kind of come to me in the last 5 years or so, the importance of it. You know, we all grow up playing pieces by dudes, or we grew up playing pieces by dudes, and it just didn't even occur to us because no one ever said anything. We just did it. I grew up playing piano, only playing pieces by dudes, and then percussion, pretty much the same. Like Keiko Abe was pretty much the only piece, maybe a bit of Sariaho, that I played as a student by a female composer. And so when I realised, well, the first thing that happened was in 2017, Ensemble Offspring programmed all female composers. And so that was a big turning point for our programming because we also commissioned, I think, 17 composers that year. So we suddenly had all this new repertoire. I think that was the Andrea Keller year, actually. We suddenly had all this new repertoire, and it meant that all our programming after that, we had pledged to do 50-50, so equitable programming. And it tends to be more female composers now because they're the composers who we got to know that year, and either we couldn't program them, we couldn't fit them in, or there were still more commissions coming or whatever. It was a very fertile kind of opportunity to discover all this new music that we'd never had the chance to program. And so if anyone says, oh, quotas are stupid, I would beg to differ, because if you want to make change quickly, you have to force the process. And so that was us forcing the process, and it's definitely worked for Ensemble Offspring. But the strange thing is that with repertoire as a percussionist, what you do is you go through life sort of, you know, building up your repertoire. And if all the repertoire you've built up is by guys, except for maybe 2 pieces by Keiko Abe and Kaya Sariaho, then you're a bit stuffed because, like, you spent all the years learning that music, and then that's your repertoire, kind of, other than a few new things that you play. And so when I realised that I had hardly any pieces by female composers in my repertoire, and I had been commissioning music as a soloist in the last 10 years, but mostly not by female composers, I was quite embarrassed, I have to say. And so my Rhythms of Change project that I've just launched, that came on the back of that, because it was knowing that what we did with Ensemble Offspring in 2017 really worked, and knowing that if I commissioned a whole CD or more of marimba and vibraphone works by Australian composers, but not just that, pieces for secondary school and early tertiary students, so they could easily include these pieces in their repertoire and they could become more conscious of gender equity in their recital programming, then that would be the way that we could make quicker change. So that's what I've done. And I'll be interested to see if it works. I mean, the pieces which are about to come out on CD are really good, I think. So it's not very often that you do a commissioning project and you are happy with every single piece that comes out of it, but I am in this instance. I worked very closely with the composers on the level and trying to make sure that the pieces weren't too hard, which I find very difficult, especially on marimba, because most composers don't really understand how to write for marimba if they're not marimba players. And then that's where my Australian Marimba composition kit happened, because I realised that no one had ever really spent much time explaining to composers how to write for marimba. And of course they don't really know, because I couldn't even explain it myself, really. So that was a really hard process, because I had to work out for myself how to explain well to composers in a sort of systematic way how to write for the marimba. And I have no idea if it's going to be helpful, or if it will mean that non-percussionists can write music that is more idiomatic for the marimba. But I thought, well, if I don't give it a go, then it might never happen. So that just came out too, and that's free on my website, a free resource. And I wanted to make it free because, well, as we know, there's no money to be made in this industry. So just make sure that the music gets better. That's all I care about.
Can you tell us something about how you made your selection process for this? Will it be more volumes? How is this project going to keep developing?
I think it will definitely keep developing, because every time I go and look at my duo list, so I love chamber music, so flute and percussion, saxophone and percussion, clarinet and percussion, double bass and percussion, whatever, I'm always just like, oh my God, there's no pieces by women. This is terrible. So that's when I decided to collate my female composition list on my website. So at least people could kind of like go, sometimes you just need a little reminder, oh yeah, I'll check out that composer's music. She's written quite a lot for my instrument. So I would definitely continue. I'm thinking of doing like some more international commissions and then some duo commissions, and so that'll probably be a sort of part 2. But for part 1, I really wanted to just collaborate with composers who I'd worked with before, both emerging and established, and people who I knew just sort of had an understanding of the instrument on some level. So the only percussionist was Brie Van Ryck, and she wrote me a vibraphone solo with like Super Ball and all this fun stuff. It's very cute. Very, very cute piece. So that was easy because she's a percussionist, so she could just write it for herself. And we did it, we did a bit of workshopping, but that was good. The other pieces, especially the marimba pieces, they required a lot of back and forth, a lot of editing, a lot of getting rid of notes, and you know the drill. But I think, I don't like to do things by halves, and so for me, making sure that a high school student, in the most part, couldn't say, oh no, I'm not going to play that piece because it's too hard. And as we know, marimba pieces tend to be too hard just because they're badly written, not because they're actually too hard. It's just really important to me. Also because I don't love practicing that much, and I don't want to play a piece that's got like velocities. I don't want to have velocities in my repertoire. It's just too hard. No, that's a bad example. Merlin. Merlin's the hardest. I hate that piece. I'm actually not the best marimba player in the world. I think to be the best marimba player in the world, you have to practice every day as a professional for hours. Don't you reckon?
Oh yeah, it's a kind of sports of its own in a sense. For me, too monocultural. As a percussionist, I really appreciate the multitude of things, and the reason I never commissioned anything for marimba alone. So yeah, I find myself more in the multi world, also including all sorts of electronics and sort of anything goes. finding gigs, how to get into the scene. You came into an organization that you said was already 10 years old when you got into it. What if you built something from scratch? Would it look different then? Or
I played in the first concert of that organization, so I was always in it. Like, I was always a member, but I wasn't the artistic director. But I don't think it would look different because I've, molded it to be the thing that I want it to be. And there are so many elements that go into that. One of the biggest ones being fundraising and grant writing and finding money to be able to make the art. And there's many times where it's very frustrating, and you don't always get the grants, and there's a lot of time going into grant writing. But at the end of the day, I think the autonomy that you have through that, for me, it makes it worthwhile, because it's not for everyone, and for a lot of people, it's much easier waiting for the phone to ring, and that's great. Like, if that makes you happy doing those gigs and you have lots of work, then it's great. But for me, I really always thought I need to take this into my own hands, and I think it's a combination of the fact that I'm not really an orchestral musician by nature. That's not really me. And I like a real range of activity. So I like playing solo recitals, I like playing chamber music, I like playing concertos with orchestras. So I like doing all those different things. And so, I don't have an agent for all my solo stuff. And when I was in Holland, I sort of tried that a little bit. And it's really hard as a percussionist because we're very, we're on the outer as a solo instrument. Of course, we're not like a violinist or a singer or a pianist. We're not going to get booked every week by an orchestra. And so while if I'd stayed in Holland, I probably could have made it as someone more like Colin Curry. But it's a lonely life. Like, I never wanted to play with orchestras every week because chamber music is so much more satisfying, actually, and it's really fun playing concertos because you're the center of attention, but if you did it too much, it'd probably not be good for your ego either, I'd say. So for me, I do like a handful of concertos a year, a handful of solo recitals a year, because that's enough for me to move all the marimba and stuff. I don't want to be moving a 5-octave marimba every week. And then with Ensemble Offspring and all the chamber music gigs I do, I tend to program vibraphone and multi stuff more, because again, the 5-octave marimba just does my head in. Like, it's like you get too old for moving that thing all the time. I'm giving myself 10 more years, and then it's not really like a cool thing for a woman to be schlepping around a 5-octave marimba anymore.
Last question. You have 25 years behind you as a professional. What are the next 20 years going to be like, and why?
Oh, that's a tricky question, because all I knew was that I put a 10-year limit on schlepping a marimba. So I think definitely the next 10 years, I want to go hard, because I think I'm in my prime, like this is the time to go hard as a leader, go hard with gender equity and making sure the world is more aware of their decision making in programming. You can't make anyone do anything, of course, and nor should you, but you can bring awareness to a topic, and that's what I really want to do. I want to inspire younger musicians to love this music as well, and to not just play tonal, I call it tonal crap by percussionists. I can't stand it. And I just want people to be more open-minded in their concept of what percussion music can be, and that really starts in a bachelor degree kind of time and earlier. So I want people to be more open-minded. I want them to play weird ass music. I want them to try improvisation, and so this idea that just promoting open-mindedness in music making, I think, and then not just students, but I want audiences to come along on the ride and go, this isn't confronting. Australia, we're very behind Europe in terms of what audiences are willing to buy tickets to and listen to. And if they haven't heard of composers, they won't tend to come. And so, it feels like a real goal to get audiences listening to this I call it living new music, so music composed in our lifetimes. And so that's my big kind of task over the next 25 years, is just one kind of audience member at a time, in a way, change their perception of what this music is and can mean to them. And I think it's so exciting, but so many people are just a bit behind the eight ball about that. And I'm really excited by the prospect of changing the perception of music and broadening audiences. And, you know, in orchestras and all over, like not just in our little niche of chamber music. I think that's really... I think it can happen. I'm not sure if it'll happen in Australia before I die, but hopefully what I do will be like a step in the right direction.
I think we mentioned death like 4 times in the podcast, so it's very...
Oh, God.
Like before
maybe because I'm in isolation.
Solitude and death. And,
Shit.
Okay. I had a little follow-up question. I'm not sure we need it, but you mentioned this kind of like from the bottom up, kind of building a community for your music. Whereas in the media, this music hardly exists, right? If you look at all the big public channels, does it mean you believe the only way to build a community or an audience is like building up from the bottom up, individual by individual? Have we given up this whole public media segment? You use your own internet channel perhaps to spread the word kind of in a more global sense, but have we given up on the record companies and the radios and the TV stations and all that? Have we kind of left that scene? Like
definitely. And I mean, with Ensemble Offspring, we do that a lot. Like we use social media and we use Facebook advertising to try and spread the word outside of our inner circle. And that's really important. You don't just want to be preaching to your inner circle. But at the same time, I feel like you have to kind of do both, but put more of your energy in the ground up and then just see what gets traction on the other side. Not worry about it too much, not spend too much energy, because you can't really control that side of things. I did spend quite a lot of time in my career recording music that I knew would get played on ABC Classic FM, which is our classical music station here in Australia. And in a way that was a little bit, I did that on purpose, because I knew that if I got my recordings played on the radio, that it would help both with my, knowledge of my brand and who I was in Australia, but also the music would be played, would get out, the music of Australian and international living composers. And so definitely I've been quite strategic with decisions like that. But at the same time, I don't think... I wouldn't tend to make decisions only for that reason, because they're like that radio station could just keel over and die next year. They might pull the funding from it. There's a very good chance. The Australian government is very liberal, which is not the American liberal, conservative, and it's very. It just doesn't put any money into the arts. So I feel very much like you've got to put your energy in the places that you can control.